Consciousness genuinely causes physical effects. It is not a passive byproduct of the brain, but acts upon the physical world through a strict structural interface. To understand how this works, we have to look at the experience of willing itself. It is common to dismiss the feeling of making a choice as an illusion, a narrative the brain invents after the machinery has already acted. But the clinical data suggests a more complex reality. The experience of agency has a specific architecture made of separable components. There is effort, the felt cost of sustaining attention. There is authorship, the sense that I did that. There is directedness toward a genuine alternative. And there is opacity. The actual mechanism connecting intention to physical action is invisible to us. We know these components are real because clinical conditions can pull them apart. In schizophrenia, patients experience thoughts without authorship. The content is present, but the sense of agency is stripped away. Conversely, in anarchic hand syndrome, a patient's limb performs complex, purposeful actions that the patient entirely disowns. They experience zero agency over its movements. If agency were a single, backward-looking illusion, it could not be selectively disrupted at specific neural sites while leaving other cognitive functions intact. These precise clinical disruptions show that the phenomenological structure of willing carves at real joints in the mind. We see this physical consequence directly in the choking phenomenon. When experts consciously attend to a highly automatized physical skill, their physical performance degrades. If consciousness were merely a passive observer watching the brain work, re-engaging it could not disrupt an automatic process. The physical execution should proceed identically whether consciousness is watching or not. The subjective experience of willing appears as a structurally robust causal force. Because it demonstrably alters physical outcomes, it requires a precise physical mechanism to interface with reality. This diagram shows the neural architecture of motor control. When presented with a task, sensory input automatically specifies multiple potential physical actions simultaneously. The brain's premotor cortex encodes multiple, competing action plans at the exact same time, holding them in parallel before any decision occurs. To manage this, the basal ganglia implement a brake-release mechanism. By default, tonic inhibition acts as a brake, suppressing all of these competing motor programs. Dopamine flows into the system to mark specific options as salient and to set the threshold for action. But crucially, dopamine itself does not dictate which specific option wins the competition. This creates a specific three-layer structure. Neural computation generates the competing physical options, and dopamine marks their value. Yet, in this model of competitive selection, there remains a gap. The question of what specific signal tips the balance to release the brake on one program while the others remain inhibited. When we compare this biological description with the phenomenological structure of willing, they align with high precision. The parallel encoding of multiple action plans maps directly to the felt openness of deliberation. The exact point where an option crosses the threshold and releases the brake corresponds to the psychological settling of making a choice. This neural architecture identifies a functional gap at the moment of selection. The model describes how the brain prepares its options, but leaves an opening at the exact coordinate where human experience dictates a choice is made. For decades, the primary deterministic argument against this point of intervention came from the Libet experiments, which seem to show that the brain decides to move milliseconds before consciousness is aware of the decision. This graph illustrates the readiness potential. Researchers saw brain activity ramping before movement, assuming a preconscious decision. But the stochastic accumulator model shows that when thousands of random neural fluctuations are averaged, they form that exact smooth upward-sloping curve. Under this model, the readiness potential is a statistical artifact caused by averaging neural noise. It reflects the mathematical shape of events crossing a threshold, not necessarily a hidden decision mechanism. The clinical data adds weight to this view. Patients who have had the supplementary motor area surgically resected, the region that generates the readiness potential, retain their full experience of voluntary action. While the debate continues, the primary empirical evidence once used to argue that conscious will is a late-arriving illusion is no longer a definitive obstacle. By reinterpreting the readiness potential, we find the path cleared for a genuine mechanism. We have a neural gap, and we need physics to explain how consciousness crosses it. At the foundational layer of physics, quantum mechanics specifies probabilities for how particles behave, but it leaves the actualization of specific individual outcomes undetermined. This space of indeterminacy is the point where physical closure is incomplete. At these junctures, physics provides necessary causes for an event, but not sufficient causes. To bridge the neural gap without breaking physical laws, we look to the quantum Zeno effect. The parallel motor programs in the premotor cortex exist as fragile quantum superpositions that naturally evolve and dissipate over time. Here, consciousness acts as a participating observer. By rapidly directing attention to a desired motor program, it observes the system. Under the quantum Zeno effect, this rapid, repeated observation prevents the targeted neural state from decaying. This stabilization biases the competition among the motor options. While the ignored alternatives fade, the observed plan maintains its strength, allowing it to cross the threshold into physical action. The vital constraint of this mechanism is that selection occurs between energetically equivalent alternatives. Consciousness injects zero new energy into the brain, preserving physical conservation laws. The bandwidth of this interaction is estimated at roughly 10 bits per second. This indicates policy-level selection. You choose reach for the glass, but the brain manages the firing of individual muscle fibers. The quantum Zeno effect provides the non-energetic mathematical mechanism required to bridge the neural gap. Physics permits undetermined outcomes, and consciousness provides the bias that makes one outcome real. What kind of entity is capable of holding the concentrated attention required to bias a quantum actualization? The framework requires that the conscious agent is understood as a persisting substance, a stable, enduring entity, rather than a transient collection of biological events. This brings in the concept of substance causation. This view holds that substances possess inherent causal powers that they exercise directly upon the world. Events are simply what substances do. Under the framework of delegatory dualism, when an agent exercises this power at a quantum indeterminacy, it preempts physical causes rather than overdetermining them. Physics leaves the outcome open. The agent provides the determining factor. This addresses the objection that undetermined choices are merely random. These selections are authored by an agent responding to rational demands, evidenced by the fact that mental effort tracks with the actual difficulty of a choice. An immaterial substance acting upon a physical quantum gap is not an empirical anomaly. Within this metaphysical framework, an agent exercising its power is the primary case of causation, the source from which these physical events follow. The complete architecture locks together across 4 levels. Phenomenology reveals the causal engagement. Neuroscience outlines the missing structural gap. Quantum physics provides the selection mechanism, and substance causation defines the entity. A skeptic will rightly point out that a coherent model does not inherently prove its own truth. Internal consistency is a requirement, not a proof. But this framework is secured by 3 independent anchors: the irreducible explanatory gap of consciousness, the self-defeat of pure determinism, and empirical data on cognitive load. Furthermore, a rigorous scientific framework must be fragile to be valid. This entire architecture is strictly falsifiable. If future experiments show that objective physical cognitive load can be systematically decoupled from subjective felt effort, if a highly demanding task reliably feels effortless, the phenomenological anchor breaks. The mechanism also carries a physical vulnerability. If neuroscientists decisively prove that quantum coherence in warm, wet brain tissue is impossible, the physical bridge fails. This complexity is required by the principle of bidirectional interaction. For an immaterial mind to move a physical world without breaking the laws of thermodynamics, it demands a multi-layered architecture spanning multiple scientific domains. This 4-level chain is not an artifact of theoretical excess. It is the mandatory structural map of a universe where human agency is real.